Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein, and together with Chess.com, I'd like to welcome you to part 3 of my series on the practical endgames. Now, before we go on with another practical endgame, I want to share with you some more positions which I call theoretical endgames, which you have to know by heart, so to say. And this is an example of a theoretical endgame. As you see, black is up a whole piece, but the question for everyone, can black win this endgame? So if you want to think about it for a little bit longer, you can go ahead and pause the video. And the answer here is simple: no. There is no way black can drive the king out of the corner and win the game. As a matter of fact, every attempt to try to drive the king either with check, the king is only going to be hiding even more into the corner. And now if you make any advancement with your king, it's going to be stalemate because the king absolutely has no moves. So this is one of those fortress positions that you kind of have to know. And this is good for the defender, especially if you're down a pawn. And if you're an attacker, you should try to watch out for allowing this type of position with the king stuck in the corner. So this is an example of a theoretical endgame. I should also point out that let's try to make this bishop, instead of a dark square bishop, a light square bishop. Now, the question for everyone is black going to be able to win now that we have a light square bishop instead of a dark square bishop? So if you want to think about it, go ahead and click on pause. And the answer is this is still a draw. So even though this is now a light square bishop, there is absolutely no way black can try to win this position. Black can try to set up this trap. For instance, if you play a bishop here, king goes in the corner, and now this trap involves the bishop sacrifice, bishop f3. Obviously, if pawn takes bishop, king f2 followed by check, and black simply queens. Well, this is no good. That's why white should not fall for this trap and simply move the king back to g1. So notice that black can't really do any progress. If king moves up, only now do you take the bishop. King takes, and as everybody knows, with the king on f1, white has the opposition, and this is a draw. So this is pretty instructive to know these types of endgames. And finally, let me go back and put a knight instead of the bishop. So what do you think? Is this going to be another draw, or black has a chance to win? So why don't you go ahead and try to pause the video if you want to figure it out. And the answer here is, with the best play, black will win the game. And how do I know that this is a winning endgame? Well, I actually know this because I studied it, but for those of you who've never seen this endgame before, you can actually try to figure it out using the method that I outlined from my previous part called thematic thinking. So what does that mean? You have to imagine the final position in your head. So rather than start moving the knight on random squares, just try to imagine the winning setup for black. And the winning setup is the following. Eventually, you're going to drive the king into the corner, right? And you have to imagine a way to force this pawn to get out from g2. If this pawn can get out to f3 or h3, then black is going to win. Remember, as I showed you with that trick with the bishop? Except now, when you put the knight on f3, and this is the best square for the knight, notice that I don't even make any moves. All it is just being able to imagine the final position, and you will get there eventually. Once the knight is on f3, the square on g1 is taken, and if it's white to move, and it is white to move, that means it's pretty much over. You have to take the knight. So pawn takes, king f2, and now black wins. So I showed you 3 examples with the bishops where it's a draw and with the knight where black wins. And these examples are theoretical endgames. So once again, there is a very important distinction between theoretical endgames and practical endgames. So now with that warm-up, let me show you a real practical endgame where you have to think in terms of plans and ideas. Here we have in front of us a practical endgame between 2 very famous grandmasters, Svetozar Grigorich, who used to be top player back in the day, and he was playing for Yugoslavia, and yeah, there used to be a country back in the day called Yugoslavia, against none other than the endgame genius Vasily Smyslov, former world champion, amazing player. You know, whoever wants to learn endgames besides Capablanca should really study Smyslov's games. So this position occurred in the game between these 2 giants all the time back in 1953 in the world famous tournament Zurich Candidates International Tournament. The winner of this tournament was actually Smyslov. He ended up playing against Botvinnik, and as we all know, that's how he became the world champion. But in this endgame, black is up a pawn, as everybody can see. But the hard part is, how do you win? Because you have doubled pawns. And it's actually not that easy to find that winning plan, because white actually has, right now at least, control over the d file and the pawn majority here on the queen side. So it's not that easy to win. So first move is actually pretty obvious. You want to fight for the d file with rook fd8. But let us stop right here in this position and try to break down the winning plan for black. Again, verbally, you want to kind of divide it into part 1, part 2, part 3, etc., where you can clearly explain the winning plan. So if you want to try to take more time, please go ahead and pause the video and give this position a really deep think, because it's not simple, and try to figure out how black should proceed to find the winning plan. And the winning plan is the following. It's actually quite simple once you manage to describe it verbally. Number 1, you have to trade 1 pair of rooks. This is very important because you don't want to give the d file to white if 2 of white's rooks can get there. So why only 1 pair of rooks? Well, you'll see shortly, because you will need the other rook for attacking purposes. So number 1, trade 1 pair of rooks. Number 2, use the extra passed pawn on the king side. Notice it's going to be the h pawn, to paralyze white's rook on h1, right? So ideally, you're going to play h5, g5, and with the threat of h4, white's rook is going to be paralyzed on the h file. Then you're going to seize control over the d file and pin down white's pieces defending the e4 pawn. Next stage of the plan, you're going to play the pawn from g5, g4. Ideally, by that point, the pawn is going to be on f3, protecting this pawn on e4. So this guy is going to be on f3. So when you put the pawn to g4, you're going to be able to trade off that f3 pawn and even more, paralyzing white's pieces. Finally, the last plan, you're going to move your king to the king side, to g5, potentially g4, and with that penetration,